In this video, I'll share 7 things that we need to understand but that we can't necessarily control about our gardens. Getting the most from our gardens means understanding the things that we can't control so that we can adapt to them. These are the climate factors, and if we can understand their effect on what we're trying to grow, we'll be able to choose crops that will grow best in the climate that we have. The first climate factor is our latitude, which is how far we are from the equator. My garden is between 42 and 43 degrees north of the equator. I live at about the same latitude as Albany, New York, Detroit, Michigan, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and the California-Oregon state line. All these spots get about the same amount of sunlight every day, but the climates of each of these areas is different. Generally speaking, temperatures get warmer as we approach the equator and cooler as we move further from the equator. But there's more to it than that. The further we are from the equator, the greater the extremes between the shortest and longest days of the year. Let me say that again, because it didn't make sense to me the first time I heard it. The further north we go, the shorter our days get in the winter. That makes sense, right? But in the summertime, the further north we go, the longer our days get in the summer. You may have seen pictures of giant heads of cabbage grown in Alaska. Well, cabbage is a cool weather crop, and it doesn't get really hot in Alaska because Alaska is so far north, but the summer days can have upwards of 20 hours of daylight. So the cabbage in Alaska get a lot of daylight and they grow pretty big. I took these pictures while visiting Fairbanks. In the winter, they get only 4 hours of sun on the shortest days, but in the summer, they get about 20 hours of sun a day. 4 hours of darkness at night might be tough for sleeping during the summer, but it's great for growing cool weather vegetables. The second climate factor is the altitude of where we are, which is how far we are above sea level. In general, higher elevations get colder at night than lower elevations, so if you're up in the mountains, you'll have to adjust your growing habits accordingly. The third climate factor is how cold it gets during the winter months. The U.S. Department of Agriculture publishes a Hardiness Zone map, which basically is a color-coded map that shows the minimum temperatures that you can expect in your area during the winter months. This map was recently updated because of climate change. See the link below this video to see what zone your area falls in. The lower the number, the colder the temperatures get during the wintertime. Garden centers use these hardiness zones to tell us whether a particular plant will survive the winter in our area. If you see plants advertised as perennials in zone 8 and above, this means that these plants can tolerate the coldest temperatures in zone 8 and survive through the winter, but the lower temperatures in zone 7, 6, or lower, for example, will probably kill them. The fourth climate factor is the proximity to an ocean or another large body of water, like the Great Lakes, for example. These large bodies of water help to moderate temperature extremes. Highs don't get quite as high, and lows don't get quite as low, because the large bodies of water help to stabilize and moderate temperature swings. But if you're landlocked, you probably noticed that land heats up faster and cools down faster than water, which makes temperatures drop lower at night and skyrocket higher during the day. How close you are to water also impacts how humid the days get during the growing season. One of my sons lives in Colorado, east of the Rockies, where the humidity is always low. In this area, things dry out much faster, but he doesn't have to worry about things like moss or slugs, because it's just too dry there. The fifth climate factor is the location of your garden relative to the path of the sun. How much sun and shade do you get during the day? Does anything block your garden from getting sun? How much does the amount of sun change as the seasons change? I talk about the sun a little bit more in another video, but choose your garden location wisely because the amount of sun you get is really important in helping determine what will grow well in your garden. The sixth climate factor is the slope or topography of your land. Does your land slope toward the sun to capture more sun? Or does it slope away from the sun to reflect the sun away? Or is your garden area flat? You'll have a harder time growing stuff on land that slopes away from the sun. Right? Is your garden in a low-lying area that collects water? That may keep your garden from drying out during the heat of the summer, but you'll have to let things dry out more before you can work the soil in the spring. So you might think about raised beds if getting an early start is important to you. The seventh and final climate factor I want to mention is something called microclimates. Microclimates are slightly different conditions that we have in different parts of our own yards, differences between one area and another. It's kind of crazy to think that we have different climates in different spots in our own yards, because everything's so close, but we do. I have a fence and a house and some trees around my gardens, and they shield my gardens from the sun for different amounts of time at different times of the year. I have a flower bed in front of my house which gets lots of sun, and I have another one behind my house that only gets a few hours of sun and only during the longest days of the summer. So I roll with these different climates and have plants that really like the sun in the front of my house and plants that do better in the shade in the back of my house. But I have to tell you a little story about microclimates that absolutely blew me away when I finally realized what was happening. I have 2 identical, or so I thought, asparagus beds planted right next to each other, right? Identical in every way and literally separated by an 18-inch walking path between them. Now every year I would watch the asparagus bed closer to the fence always lag behind the other bed by a week or 2 compared with the one further from the fence. It turns out that the fence starts blocking the sun on the bed closest to the fence for an extra hour or so every day, and the bed closer to the fence takes longer to warm up and come to life. Keep these 7 things in mind for your garden: latitude, altitude, hardiness zone, how close we are to large bodies of water, how shady or sunny our garden is, how our land is sloped, and different microclimates in our own yards. And when we understand what the ideal growing conditions are for each of the vegetables we want to grow, we can use this information to help us get the most out of our gardens. Thanks for tuning in.